Israel's Arava Valley. In summertime, the heat reaches 130 degrees. Vegetation is scarce. Windstorms arrive unexpectedly. Since the return of the Sinai Peninsula to Egypt in 1982, the Arava has become the southern border of Israel. This largely uninhabited frontier is just the place for a pioneer, someone with a practical approach to the impractical work of pursuing a dream. In this dream, people learn to coexist with the desert, to carve out a green niche in the sandy terrain.
This is argan from the mountains of Morocco, and it's a wild plant that we're domesticating, and its fruits are pressed for edible oil, probably the best cooking oil in the world.
Elaine Solloway came to Israel 12 years ago. She lives on an agricultural settlement, a kibbutz, in the Arava. Slowly but very surely, she is making a green mark on her surroundings. Elaine single-handedly runs an experimental tree station which is introducing new fruit crops to the area. The success of her experiments has brought her national recognition.
These trees grow usually in the heights, but also in dry places without much water. So this plant may be a real success here. You call up someone like the Royal Horticultural Society, and you ask them, what can you tell me about these maganga trees I've just got? And they say, what on earth is a maganga? That's the Royal Horticultural Society. So these trees are so exotic, they're not even in the textbooks yet.
These fruit trees are brought here from the deserts of Africa and Asia. For Elaine, each young tree represents a possibility for changing the future. One of these exotic varieties may turn out to be a viable cash crop for this largely barren region of Israel. Or perhaps a sapling will grow up to become a solution to hunger in Africa.
I think we can take the cultivars that we've brought back and the wild plants that we've brought back from Africa, probably develop high-yield varieties, and then send them back. This is a very, very important part of the project. Not only to make our economic base wider, but to help certain nations with similar climatic conditions. And this could potentially save millions of lives, and I'm certainly very happy that I can be a small part of it.
Working alone, Elaine is raising 150 varieties and conducting over 20 experiments at once. Nearly all of her trees survive, and most of them bear fruit. This tremendous success rate may be due to the special relationship Elaine has with her trees.
This is a little hard to explain, but I'm sure anyone who's ever had a pet or had a garden or raised a steer for the 4-H club or whatever, that everyone realizes that if you take care of something and you're responsible for all its needs, there's eventually a connection between you and whatever you're taking care of. And these trees are depending on me. If I don't care about them, they haven't got a chance down here. So I really do feel like I'm their mother. Usually something I don't admit in the dining room with the kibbutz, but it's true. I like all the trees, but there are some varieties that are so unusual and so interesting that I make sure I visit them every day. And, well, one of them is the maganga. It looks sort of like a fig tree designed by a Martian. And from the time I got them, they've increased their size by about 16 times. I really like looking at them. They produce a nut called a mankedi nut, which is apparently the sole protein food in a certain season of people living in the Kalahari.
The conditions here can be even more extreme than in the tree's native deserts. Sand instead of soil, dry windstorms, water that is salty and buried 300 meters below the surface, and of course there's the heat.
In the summer, it is extremely hot, approaching 130 degrees. The winters are actually rather nice and moderate, but we have no rainfall at all. What these trees are growing in cannot be called soil. It's actually dune sand. Actually, they say you can dehydrate here in 4 hours, but I've never given them a try.
Elaine accepts the limitations of the desert. She does not expect to transform dry sand into dark soil. Instead, her careful selection and grafting techniques produce varieties which can survive on the salty desert water. Bringing that water to the trees is her biggest concern.
The groundwater here is 300 meters away. So whatever the trees get, we have to give them. You can see between tree and tree the small black pipes. That's our drip irrigation system. Every tree has 1 or 2 drip fixtures depending on its size, and each fixture gives off 8 liters per hour. Mixed with the water, of course, is the fertilizers. And I mulch. I use sawdust, I use manure, I use dead leaves. All this organic material allows the very poor earth here to retain the water. But water is the single most important thing.
She's unique. And without her, I don't think we can perform anything here. Because
Yossi Mizrahi of Ben Gurion University supervises Elaine's work. He says Elaine's efforts are crucial to developing the Arava Desert.
She's talking to them. She treats them personally. And you can look at the area, you cannot see even one single weed. And this region, whenever you put some fertilizer and water, you can see the weeds are coming and popping. And look at it. Without her, I don't think we can push ahead this project. And with her, we have high hopes.
Often people ask me, do you talk to your trees? And I guess I'll have to admit, yes, I do talk to my trees. As a matter of fact, the trees I talk to purposely grow much quicker than the trees that I don't. I'm not going to write a paper about this and then get hounded out of the scientific community, but I'm willing to admit it. I believe it matters. There's definitely some sort of relationship between how much you care for a tree or a puppy or a kitten or a child and how well it thrives. And I think this is probably true of anything that's alive.
The first to benefit from Elaine's work are the members of her community, Kibbutz Ketura. 10 years ago, she helped introduce mangoes, palmettos, and dates to the kibbutz. Today, those trees are central to the economy of the entire region. But kibbutz members may soon find themselves harvesting mahor harwana, mankhedi nuts, and marula fruit.
I can't say whether or not the fruit will be an export crop, but agriculturally, I see things that might be very successful. Making the economic base of this area sturdier by adding a crop or two could really help us in the long run. Could allow us to use this area. It's been uninhabited for thousands of years.
In 10 or 15 or maybe 20 years from now, we are going to export unique nuts or unique fruits that are not grown in any other country in the world for export to Europe and to the United States. I can see that farmers that are going to live here can make some money, as they do today with mango or dates or with pomelo.
The prospect of a successful export crop is enough to encourage a great investment of energy and money. But if the gamble pays off, there is another, perhaps greater reward. If Elaine can learn how to grow these fruits, a tree can be returned to its native home in Africa. People in countries like Botswana can be taught to grow more of their own food.
I believe that eventually we'll work out most of our problems on this earth. And that in order to do that, there are certain things that people have to do. One of them is to look for ways to make each other more comfortable. And of course, the most important of that right now in this hemisphere is food. There's a terrible famine going on not very far to the south of us, which is going to claim hundreds of millions of lives in the next 30 years if somebody doesn't do something. And one of our basic ideas is to introduce food crops to places where there isn't anything that's been cultivated.
Because of the consistent drought which is sometimes hitting us very much, our food production is really not adequate.
Abraham Nikamani is a visiting researcher from Botswana. He hopes to return to his country with knowledge that can turn native wild trees into domestic crops.
There is quite a lot of potential to domesticate fruits like the morula, like the mogongo, like riwia, because you find in most cases people harvest them, but not at a very large scale.
Besides helping feed the hungry, there are political gains from Elaine's work. Like most other African countries, Botswana has no diplomatic ties with Israel. An exchange of agricultural know-how gives Israelis and Africans a rare opportunity to get to know each other.
Before I came here, I used to think that the Israelis like fighting. But after having come here, discussing with them, reading books about Israel, going around the country, I feel there is quite a lot of difference. The attitude of the people, the way how they relate stories is quite different. Botswana will take quite a time to accept some views from Israel, but I'm quite optimistic that maybe in future this can make a significant change in the attitude of people. I'm quite positive.
It will be years before she sees the full impact of her work, but Elaine, a published poet and a mother of 5, believes in a better future.
Before I came to Ketura, I lived on the Golan Heights. I was there for the Yom Kippur War, and I've seen more war than most soldiers. 6 of my friends were killed, and I've been in over 50 shellings. That could happen again. It could happen here. I have to accept that possibility. Also, I have 5 sons, and they'll have to grow up and go into the army. That's worse than any possibility of immediate violence for me. But if people could think that, well, I may not be having such a good time now, but I'm working for something worthwhile. I'm working so that the world will be better for my children, or the world will be safer for my children. You can bear a lot, but if you don't believe your children are going to have a world at all, you don't have the courage to do much.
I was in the United States and bought an atlas to my son. This atlas was published in 1982. And I was looking throughout the atlas and saw the map of our country. And they marked with a gray color the region of the Arava Valley. And in the legend, they wrote down non-agricultural land. I was insulted by that. And I wish that the editor of the atlas will take a time and come and visit this, what he called non-agricultural land. I think he has a surprise.
As a matter of fact, most of the time, people say that things we're doing are ridiculous, or they're not practical, or they cost too much. But we're doing them. I think it may be easier to try projects like this in Israel. Israelis have the attitude that unless it's downright impossible, they'll give it a whack anyway.
Alone in the orchard, Elaine has time to think. Usually, she concentrates on her experiments, but sometimes she contemplates the meaning of her handiwork.
The sky scratched to dull pewter. The sun fades to a haze on a battered gray horizon. All the known is unfamiliar, every landmark alien. I am lost in my own garden under trees bent by the wind. As long as I've worked here, I've been here 12 years now, and I've seen the field spread from nothing, literally, to acres and acres of trees and alfalfa and field crops like peppers and tomatoes. Whenever you go up in the hills, everything returns to its proper proportion. This is relatively a small desert when you think of the Sahara and the Gobi and the Kalahari, but all our work, when you look at it from the hills, it's like a little green stitch on a very, very large piece of brown cloth.